Hi everybody. So really I'm talking a bit more about the practical process perspective of working with the Team Connect 360, which comprises of sort of three simple steps: the commissioning phase, and then the point where we launch the survey, and then finally when we produce a report ready to share with your client for you to start working with your team. Has John frozen again? Hang on, I'm going to just see if I can stop John sharing a moment and I'll take over the deck.
I think if you just start sharing, it should stop his.
Yeah, I'm doing that. Thank you. Just looking for the full icon. Sorry, be with you in just a second. Can everybody see? Okay. So really the first step is to look at commissioning. This is the part where you'll be working with the project sponsor, identifying really who should be included within the survey. So looking at those different stakeholder groups and looking at whose views would be important in establishing the performance and the function of the team. There's normally quite a lot of work in this area and sometimes quite a lot of questions that arise about who should be included. But generally speaking, we look at data really of around 20 to 30 people. The survey will work with smaller numbers. We generally say 10 as a minimum. And that really is for people to be sort of really candid and open in their responses. The data's aggregated. So obviously the smaller the team, that's just something that we need to be aware of, that it would make that sort of less anonymous and perhaps people would be less comfortable in engaging. So generally speaking, 20 to 30 are included in that initial data capture. At this point, you'd also be talking about when's the good time to launch the survey and agreeing with them a deadline date. So that's really critical to the survey from a perspective of planning and launching it. So we've got a date that we're working towards. Once you've agreed the data and we understand who's going to be included within the survey, it's really important that the project sponsor, and you can work with them with this, briefs those people that are going to be surveyed. So they really understand who in the team they are providing feedback for. We often find at this point, if that's not been done thoroughly enough, there can be confusion from those working outside the team, understanding who am I providing this feedback for and making sure they understand who forms part of the team. That briefing email, we do have templates that we can support you with, but of course every organisation, every client and every team is different, but it could be a useful starting point for you in working on those initial communications. Once we're ready to go and the team, and you've confirmed to us that the team have been briefed and are expecting to receive the email, we launch the survey for you. And we will send out the online questionnaire for completion to all of those captured in your data. That is an online questionnaire that can be accessed, via PC, tablet, smartphone, really sort of simple and easy for your clients, employees and team members to use. Throughout that process, we will keep you updated. And when it's time when you're happy with the response rate and you agree that with the project sponsor, we can issue the report and we can react quite quickly to those tight timelines and usually make this available to you within 24 hours of the report closing. I'm sure you're quite familiar with the look and feel of the report and how that works following your training. So just a bit of a recap on the process. So we'll provide you with email templates if they're needed. We can set up the survey within 24 hours of receiving the data from you. We will also keep you updated. So as well as reminding those people that haven't responded to the survey, we make a report available to you, keeping you updated throughout the process with who's replied and who hasn't. And that allows you to speak to the project sponsor or to agree communications if some internal prompting's needed, just to help really drive up the engagement. We normally get a response rate of between 80 and 85% as an average by managing the process in this way. And as I said, we would then close the report when we agree with you, you're happy with the response rate received, and present the report to you. We recognise as well at the moment that people are working from home, and obviously the report with all the graphics is quite heavy on the ink cartridge and the planet in terms of paper. So we do have printer friendly copies available for you as well, but we'll send those to you in PDF format when you close the survey. So in terms of the detail, the starting cost is £665, and that's for a group of up to 30. However, we will build in a discount of 20% for your first coaching client. And in addition to that, an additional 20% for if you're working with not-for-profit organisations, or if you're working with a client based in a developing country. As mentioned before, 20 to 30 gives you an excellent quality of data. I handle the process for the Team Connect 360, so I'm sure you've got my email, but it's here for anybody that hasn't. You can send through questions about the process and also when you're ready to launch the survey. Currently, the survey is only available in English. Although we are looking at a more global audience, and we'll respond to that if the demand's there. Okay. So, John, I think I'm handing back to you and Danny for this part.
Yes, indeed. So any questions about the TC360 structure, process, layout? Any?
John, please, just in terms of one of the questions people want to know, what is the scientific evidence based around this, and the rigorous testing psychometrics around the team? Is there something we can just look up or read up, or is there, what's a good answer to give to people?
Yeah, well, don't forget, this isn't a psychometric. So it's not drawing a conclusion from data that's been picked up with clever questions. I mean, that's what a psychometric gives you, a very cleverly designed structure, and then they construct an answer from it. This is simply data generation. Okay. These are simply the questions that we have identified that are good questions to ask. And these are your people responding to those questions. So in a sense, it's very simple. It doesn't need that technical backup and analysis of why, because it's simply a Q&A. And they, the other thing, Tracy, we are still working on the fact that potentially you can change the text in the questions to make them suit. At the moment, that's still problematic with our platform, but we're hoping to change that. So you could, although the structure has to stay the same, going forward, we're hoping that you will be quite quickly and easily be able to change some of the words in the text that will suit your organization. But basically, we just have the data that I can't remember how many, 200 or 300 coaches have used this with companies and find it useful, because like at any 360, it's a starting point for a conversation rather than an analysis of what is correct. So that's the information to give back. It's very different from a psychometric.
Yeah. So John, if I could just add to that in South African context, because we have significant problems with most profiling tools and the Health Professions Council. So this is a questionnaire. It is not a diagnostic.
That's it. Yeah. We should remove the word diagnostic from any of our text in order to, yeah. So it's not a profiling tool, it's a diagnostic. It's not a diagnostic, sorry.
It's not a profiling or a diagnostic, it's a questionnaire. Because otherwise you have to be registered with the HPCSA in order to administer it.
Yes.
And so we need to get around that.
Good.
Or avoid that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, that's very helpful.
So where John mentioned about the personalisation of questions, what we are able to do is, where we do have some flexibility, is in the email communications that go out. So the survey invitation and reminders, we can adapt that text to help support and frame the work you're doing with your particular client if you decide to use the tool.
In terms of the sourcing, I don't know, John, probably the best way of explaining it is this has been done hundreds, if not thousands of times. And it's a conglomeration of the key questions of working with thousands of high-performing teams over time. So the data is, the questions are always kept relevant to the teams that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So part of what was behind that is in South Africa, I think the people are quite cost sensitive, especially in this economic environment, and making it seem that this is a worthwhile tool. And I would probably pitch it as this helps us get to the, bring focus very quickly on and get useful data very early on. And it just helps us go in the right, start going in the right direction using this tool. So you know, in terms of making it value for money.
Yeah, we just in our practice, we don't separate it out. It's included as part of the program.
Makes sense.
So you avoid the negotiation altogether.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions on that, Danny, can I hand over to you? For some reason, my internet connection is terrible this morning.
You can. So 1 second.
So Tracy, you need to close your screen.
There we go. So have you got my screen up now?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's just get onto this screen so we can see what's happening. So we're going to move on to sourcing client teams.
Yeah.
How that operates. John, do you want to kick off? Or?
So we were just interested in hearing your experience and sharing ours. So in what ways have you been successful? And and Rod, I heard earlier, and a couple of you have said, you know, how you've positioned it. And that's been productive. I think, Branny, you were saying that you were using this language. So just interested to hear your experiences, what's worked for you, and any tips that you have found, first of all, in helping to promote that.
So maybe I can kick off, John, just to
Okay.
Just as a quick insight, is that we've very rarely been successful in gaining this kind of teamwork through proposals or through tenders. It doesn't work that way for some reason. It's because there's so much. I mean, 3 days just to touch the surface of what it's about. To try and explain it in a proposal is just impossible. What we've started doing is when people have asked us for proposals, we say we can't do one yet because we haven't had the conversation about what the work needs to be. And so why don't we have a chat first? Because if you're coming with the solution as team coaching, we need to know what the problem was.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work for everyone. Depends on the nature of the organization.
Yes.
Danny, how much work do you do before you start putting prices on the table? Do you charge people for initial analysis, or do you tend to do quite a lot of work and then backload it, if you know what I mean?
No, we don't backload. The initial discussions is really to get to a stage where we could start the scoping. We'll then quote for the consultancy piece, which is the SID part. So we'll quote for that as a consultancy piece, and that will include the 360 and all of that in there. And then once we've got that, we say, right, this is the first part. Now we can come back and say how we're going to go into execution. But there's a lot of relationship building ahead of time.
Yeah, so Danny, may I clarify, since for our process, we start with scoping and the contracting. So that means, do you charge for the since in our scope and contract, we will propose our what our work is and what the time and cost will be. So how you charge about the scope and the contract, since you need to conversation, interview. Right.
So the
you
scope,
charge by time. Yeah.
So the scoping, the initial scoping, the initial contracting we do up front, that isn't a cost. But as soon as we move into inquiry, then there's a cost associated with it, because there's a value you're going to give back to the organization. So the inquiry part is and then obviously the diagnosis. But really that initial part, the scoping, is what is the work we need to do together, and what do we need to know that we don't know yet. That's a conversation that we tend not to charge for. We then charge for the inquiry piece, which says, so we need to find out, so here's the cost for finding out. And then once we've found out, then we can start looking at how we design what the execution needs to be, which gives you an ideal opportunity for recontracting again.
And of course, that's one way,
it's just one way
of approaching it. And some organizations, especially if you've got a good relationship with your client, and I've had a number of assignments come through individual coaching of the team leader, and therefore they are already fairly committed to the whole process. So it's straightforward to identify the whole thing, and I've got an understanding and can clarify the scoping, the inquiry, and the whole package. So it's easier to give a one package. And I know that we have a colleague in Hungary, and they will not make a distinction. They expect all this, the inquiry is for the consultant, the coach's interest, and therefore they will refuse to pay for that. So it has to be backloaded onto the whole package. So it's very much about you working out your perspective on what works best for you,
and what that organization or those systems require in order to gain the work. So there is no one recipe, as you probably gathered from what we've done so far, Betty. There is no one way of doing this.
Yes.
Sorry, John and Danny. What I've found has helpful in setting up the and taking the conversation further is this identifying that for teams, the real magic is in the places between people, or the spaces between people. And it's the way that I've always looked at teams and high-performing environments is that what the differentiator is average teams, task-orientated, KPI-orientated, high-performance places are relationship-focused. And this is what systematic team coaching is really geared towards in building those relationships and building that trust in a way that you can have those real conversations very quickly and deal with it. So for me, what's changed for me in the way that I'm start talking about it is looking at these spaces between or the places between. and rather than, you know, the actual work or the silos or the people. And people seem to buy into that. They see that is the problem that a lot of people are having within the team space, is how do we really enhance the relationship and make it more honest, yes, and safe, psychological safe, but to have those necessary conflictual and difficult conversations.
Yes. So another experience I've had is being invited in for a 2-day workshop to help the team building. So through various contacts, they've had team has had a problem, and then having agreed to that initial session, I've a little bit like you're saying, Rod, expanded out and said, okay, so this is one part, but what else? What is the systemic perspective that's influencing that? So starting out with what the connection with the client and what they are requesting in terms of something short term. And I've had a couple of occasions where that's been successful in starting there and then opening out and getting the team excited and engaged about seeing a systemic perspective over time rather than just the one-off facilitation event. And any others? You know, who else has been selling? Jill, how have you managed it? Because you're fair. I often think that consultants who are already doing OD or change management find that it's simply a transition from the way they've usually engaged, but they have already the connections internally, and then it's a case of transferring their style. So I think you're saying that, Branny, and maybe Jill, that it's about changing your style, but you have already access through your current channels.
Actually, this was for me, I didn't, I had an existing relationship, but I wasn't working with the client already. So it was purely timing. So I was talking to them about a individual coaching assignment. And what became clear is there was a broader team issue. And so we just explored it. And actually this opportunity came up just at the end of our training in January. So the timing was perfect in that I was able to use the systemic framework as a way of explaining the approach. And I believe in this case, given the amount of change that's going on in this organization, that it's very, very relevant to the need of the client. So this was just pure old business development for me, John, and just asking the questions. So
lovely. Great.
And getting nods from Branny and Joe as well.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Okay,
Joe.
I will jump in. So yes, the piece of work I've got at the moment, I was working with an existing client about 18 months ago on something completely different, but they started talking to me about some individual coaching, but for the members of a newly formed team. When I say newly formed, it transitioned. So the team had been working together already, but their remit was changing. So just kicking that off really. In terms of getting the work, I use the framework to explain how I would go about working with that team, how we would engage with the stakeholders. I think it really helped the sponsor to have the kind of clarity to understand what we'd be covering, and it did really link in with all the things that she'd covered during our scoping conversation. And so she felt very comfortable with the process. Similar to what Danny was saying, so the conversations I've had so far, no charge. It did help that I already understood the organisation and had met the majority of the people already. I've then set out for the next kind of phase, which is really kind of the diagnostic and the inquiry phase, working with each of the individuals, stakeholders, and then we've got a team workshop. But we've agreed that we'll then see what we need after that and we'll recontract. So that seems to me to kind of work quite well. The sponsor's really happy. I think I'm in quite a good position though, having that existing relationship.
Yes.
So yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Joe. And Branny, were you going to add anything?
Well, I think Joe's made all the point. I think most of the points I wanted to make as well, which is, yeah, a lot of the conversation is more like a friendly conversation in order to understand what's going on and in order to understand what the need is, so you can respond to it in the language of the client, really. And yes, in my experience with my consultancy and as well as this, it's always best to go step by step, because more, and what you just described, John, is you know, when there is one opportunity to kind of roughly show what it's going to look like, people feel more comfortable to go deeper and to go further. And it's, I suppose it just kind of, it depends on the type of client that you have. So I didn't have experience with working with like OD team, where the OD team commissions you to do the big piece, which they already know what they want, blah, blah, that kind of thing. So this is much more about explaining to someone that they need it rather than them coming to me saying, we need team coaching.
Yes.
But I suppose the challenge for me has been that I've been a consultant when I was basically recommending things to them, and then trying to help with recommendations, with implementation, which is where we got to the point where we couldn't implement anything because the team was totally dysfunctional. So that was my proposition, is if we want to implement any of this, we need to sort the team out, we need to strengthen them. So, yes. but I think they had, so that is kind of the challenge for me, and the challenge for them is that they had probably 2 or 3 other processes going on internally, which were taking their time and their bandwidth. So it's just kind of probably wasn't the priority, because these other things are more important.
Yes. I mean, I was whatever else is going on, it then sometimes takes over. Doing some work with an NHS client, and the COVID, they were responsible for pharmacy, and you know, there was a huge, obviously with the new COVID drugs coming on stream, suddenly it was all hands to the deck to get this stuff out. So everything has been put on hold. So you're constantly adjusting. Am I coming across clearly because of the technology?
It's a bit stuttery, but you're okay. And for others, how have you gone about explaining systemic team coaching? How do you explain it in a soundbite?
I was saying to my client, strengthening the team to achieve the objectives you want for this year, because he was developing a strategy. So that was my summary: strengthening the team to help them deliver for what's needed.
For others,
I kind of talk about talk about team development and how we might work with the team, and sort of draw their attention to, if we're just looking inside the team, then we're missing probably the majority of the picture. So the inside of the team is important, but what does the team look like from the outside, and what do we see when we're looking towards the outside? So I suppose just starting to really kind of lightly start that process of thinking about these different sort of perspectives on the team. And I found that as soon as you start to talk about that, I mean, I had the same kind of penny drop moment as well. It's just so obvious. Why would you not do that?
I don't know about you and the others. What I'm finding is that a lot of the team coaching requests are coming because the team is dysfunctional or it's not achieving targets. And like the original individual coaching, it was remedial. This is a problem and we need help to solve it. A little bit like our Newcom case study. It's less, I think, probably it's small, 10% of my clients are coming because they actually want to improve from where they are. They want to be more successful. So generally it's problem driven in the first instance. And I expect that, you know, in 5 years' time, we will have got to a place, as with individual coaching, where it's more development driven rather than remedial. What would you say, Danny? What's your experience?
Yeah, very often we'll try and change the conversation away from the problem.
Okay, yes.
Because if we're complicit with going into it being a problem, then we're playing the wrong game. So
Yes.
it's very much, how do we create it as a future back, outside in, and make the team fit for tomorrow's challenge, not focusing so much on what's wrong today. And you're right, in the COVID world, there's very little bandwidth for the team leaders and for the sponsors to think about future. But if we don't actually hold that light for them and say, look, we can, if you want a sticking plaster to make the team better at yesterday's problem, we can do that. But how is that going to serve you in the future? So it's trying to shift that conversation away from problem diagnosis to saying, how do we make the team fit for tomorrow, not for yesterday?
Yeah, indeed. And that's a good reminder. I can often slip into solving problems, but my point was that currently we are invited in because there's a problem, not because we want to improve. It's because there is a difficulty in the first place that they want to resolve. And as you say, you need to reframe it. But the entry point is we have a problem.
If there's no problem, you're not going to get called in.
At the moment, this will change as with individual coaching.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we done? Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to look at supervision.
So before we do, John, do you think just a 5-minute comfort break for people?
Yep.
I'm seeing some edgy people, and then
that of just needing to move or go to the loo.
Whatever it is, but 5 minutes, step up, stretch, whatever it is, go to the loo.
Fantastic. Judith, are you on your, have you had your session? Okay, the internet is terrible. It's dropped 3 times already. Yeah.
Now we're all refreshed and back in harness. We're going to move on a little bit more. So let me just get this slide up. Okay. So this is part of the what's next, or where do we go from here? Because it's all well and good just doing the course and getting the ideas, but how do we sustain it, and how do we keep building? Because just taking the certificate course just gives you the oversight. It gives you a taste of what it's about, that you can actually engage with clients. But where do we take it going forward? And so the next thing I want to just move into is the area of supervision. Because I think the February guys will know, but for the January guys as well, I really don't believe that you can operate in a systemic fashion without supervision. It really just doesn't. The work you're doing is so complex and has so many different lenses that it makes it really difficult to do without supervision. So the three main areas of supervision, and three areas of focus, is how you're helping the client to grow. What are you doing? How is it working? What are the conversations you're having to help the client grow in their ability to think and act systemically? So it isn't necessarily what are you doing in terms of the tools and techniques. It's more in terms of how are you helping the client to grow in their own thinking and where they need to get to be able to sustain the work beyond you just doing the intervention. There's another part which is your personal learning, because it's a reflective space. I'm reflecting on what's happening for you as you're engaging with the clients and their systems. And how are you developing and learning as a result of the experiences you're having? And again, supervision will bring and tease some of that out. As well as looking at all of the nested systemic processes that are going on in the engagement, the parallel processes that are happening at multiple levels of engagement, what's happening in one area that's reflecting in another, and how do we hold that wide-angled empathy for all the systems and all the parts within those systems. So supervision really touches on all three of these, and they're not separate, they're all interacting all at the same time. So supervision then in a systemic team coaching context becomes invaluable to keep you on top of the game, to keep you learning, to keep you aware of maybe some of your blind spots as well as you go through the process. So in order to supervise at team coaching level is a step up from the individual supervision you may get for one-to-one coaching. It's different. And systemic team supervision, team coaching supervision, is a step above that. So the go-to model for most supervision is Peter's 7-eyed model of supervision, which some of you may have come across. And if you Google it, it's out there as the main form of supervision, not just in coaching, but also in some of the helping professions. And it crosses over into nursing, for example, among some of the others. With systemic team coach supervision, we move it a stage beyond, as you would expect. So Peter's 7-eyed model covers the first 7 areas of this model. So we're looking in terms of the client situation. So what's happening within the team? What the coach has done, the coach's interventions. So how they've involved in the team. And also the relationship between the coach and the team. Very valid point, and very often a rich area of finding parallel process. We then have to look at what's happening for the coach themselves. And as systemic team coaching is normally more than one coach, normally buddy coaching, there will be processes going on between the team coaches that echoes what's happening in the client system or in the team. So it's bringing that to the fore. There's then the relationship between the team coaches and the supervisor, because something may be playing out in that relationship that's also playing out in the team. And the supervisor then bringing their own feelings, their own emotion, their own sense making as the supervision is going on. So you've got that level of level 6 and the broader system outside of that. That's normally where in one-to-one supervision, that's the process. However, we know that in systemic team coaching, we ignore the stakeholders at our peril. And so Peter adopted the 7-eyed model that he developed into a 10-eyed model by bringing in this -1, -2, -3 at the bottom. They aren't minus in the sense of less than, it's just they fit in separately, which is the team stakeholders. How do we bring those into the supervision conversation? And the relationship between the team stakeholders and the client team, which as someone was mentioning earlier, was it Brian? I can't remember who it was who was speaking about it. As soon as you mentioned involving the stakeholders, the whole team went, no. It's great information, it's great learning. And we can use that in a supervision space to help our learning and help the team to evolve. There's also that -2 of how the team, once the team engages with the stakeholders, what's the relationship between the team and the stakeholders? So that -3 is then what's happening in that relationship that may be echoed in the relationship between the team and the coach, the team, the coach, and the supervisor. If we're also working in a group supervision space, then you also have the number of different supervisees bringing different cases, learning from each other. And we also have that complexity which we can bring on top. So my advice would be find a systemic team coach supervisor to supervise any work you do in team space. John, I don't know if you've got anything to add in that, that for me, to hold all of those various lenses to enable the learning and to enable the supervision to be useful isn't something that comes just through being trained as an individual coaching supervisor. You're on mute, John. There you go.
Everything is working so slowly. I've just heard that from our WeChat group in the street that the whole road is experiencing this problem. So yes, there's a wonderful breadth of complexity in offering and providing team coaching supervision, and really to say that we are available, and there is a pool of team coach supervisors. So let us know, and we can offer help and support, either one-off or a series of sessions to help you through. It's also great if you're working as a co-coaching team, because the supervision can also help that connection between you.
And as groups as well. If you're worried about cost, then pull a group of team coaches together.
Yes, yeah. But if you're struggling either to find the finance, or you have a good network, then it will help to do the team review process that we did on day 3. So do use that with your colleague, a colleague, just that will be a first step in helping you identify some of the issues and the directions that you could pay more attention to, and let us know if you need some help with your team engagement. It also becomes a fantastic way of embedding the learning about team coaching. Am I still audible?
Yes, you are, John.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, if you go quiet, we'll tell you.
Okay, that's it. That was all I wanted to add.
Yeah. Okay. So, what else do you need as you start to build your practice? Or any questions about supervision? Zoe.
Yeah, Danny, hi. Well, yeah, I am actually literally starting my systemic team coaching because I've never worked with any team. So this is quite a new field and area for me. When you were talking about the supervision, for me, supervision was like a mentor coaching. That's what I've done when I started to learn coaching. But it was a little bit more complicated, so I have to read it again. So I didn't really get it. What was this? You know, it was a lot of layers and lenses. So I'm a little bit lost right now. Does the supervision means something like mentoring? Because now I need someone to help me start my team coaching. Does the supervisor do that for me? I mean, help me through, I mean, going through, I mean, start my business, or am I getting it wrong? I mean, I'm yeah, I'm a little bit lost here.
Yeah. So mentoring is a separate skill, but yes, it is one that would be really useful as you're starting out in team coaching to find a mentor to help you. Supervision is more around your learning beyond the training, and we'll come to the diploma as well, but it's really how do you evolve in conjunction with the team that you're working with and their stakeholder community. So how do we lift the whole thing to a different level? So it's looking more at blind spots. It may be looking at ways of thinking. It may bring in some of the models and things, but it's a different discussion to a mentor discussion. I actually think both are useful. And I don't think it's an either or.
But it is a one-to-one session or work, or yeah.
Yeah, mentoring tends to be the one-to-one. Supervision could be one-to-one, one to, if you're working with a pair, as a pair of coaches, it's 1 to 2. It could be 1 to many. I run supervision groups, we normally try and cap at 8 people, 8 coaches plus the supervisor, because otherwise it just gets too complicated.
Right.
Anything to add, John?
So the way I do supervision does have elements of mentoring, but more about the practice. So what is my experience in managing team engagements and finding ways of bringing that in a coaching style. The supervisor also has some responsibility for the team as well, which is what makes it more significant than a peer review session, in that the supervisor will feel some ethical responsibility for the practice of their supervisee. So it has a higher level of responsibility to the end client, and the supervisor will help to guide you if there are any ethical or boundary issues. Very often there's this complexity. If you're doing one-to-one sessions coaching with the team members, how do you manage the complexity around confidentiality, what you share, what you don't share. So, you know, if you hear stuff from a stakeholder, how is that fed back in? So really the boundary complexity is a lot greater, and the supervisor there is to help you, in a sense, navigate through that complexity and those boundaries, and being able to help, say, if they think there is an ethical issue around confidentiality, to help you navigate that space. And therefore it takes someone who has a lot more experience, whereas with a mentor, they can be someone who has just some experience and is there to give you some guidance, really, on the things that you could do and to help you build your practice. As you say, would be much more of a mentor. So they're different levels. I think that might add more complexity to the conversation.
Yeah, we haven't put the ethical dimension into that model, which maybe we need to.
Yeah. I find that the most frequent conversation and supervision is, how do I manage the boundaries and what I say and what I don't say, and when am I slipping into purely facilitating the event as opposed to coaching them to run their own event. So managing those levels of intervention, as well as managing the boundaries, and also managing yourself in that. In teams, you're more likely to get caught up in the emotions of the team. And I know it happens to me quite regularly that I end up feeling I want to take a side. You know, I like one person more than another, and I think their view is right and the other person's wrong. And it's in my head, and I have to, how do I manage that? And that's where I will talk. You know, if I can't resolve it, I will then talk to a supervisor and say, look, you know, what's going on here? I'm getting confused. Is it part of the system? Is it part of me? Is it their dynamics? Am I just have lost the plot here?
Or is it all of those, John?
Almost certainly all of those, but needing
and more
help to unentangle those different threads.
Or the other topic that tends to come up is agency, where you're co-opted to speak on behalf of the team or part of the team and form a go-between.
Yeah, that's what I meant by boundaries. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Very tricky.
Any other questions?
Just to say thank you, Zoe, for sharing that you're at the beginning of your journey. There's a lot of experienced people here who have a lot of teamwork and consultancy experience. So that transition isn't easy.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay.
So moving on then, John, do you want me to carry on sharing slides with you?
Yeah. Well, you were going to talk about the diploma.
Am I? Okay.
Yeah. Well, you're right up against. You're more engaged in it at the moment.
So the diploma, the next stage. It isn't just a diploma; it's a master practitioner diploma, which is the next stage, and it starts later on in 2021. We're currently looking around June time. So the certificate gives you an overview. It gives you a taste and a bit of experience on the various areas. The diploma is a deep dive. We'll be spending across the different modules, we'll be spending the time going into each of the disciplines in far more depth, as well as some experiential work. You will be working with a case study team. So 1 second, I'm just going to stop sharing this for a second and try a different way, just to try and get things working properly. Is that any better? I didn't see who raised it in chat.
Yep, that's nice and clear.
That's nice and clear. Cool. You'll be applying it to your own case study team. So you will be going out, and part of your experience is being able to find and contract with a team to do a systemic team coaching intervention. You'll be creating your own model of team coaching. So one of the key things as we've gone through the certificate, we've said this is the framework. This is the scaffolding around which you can build your version, your own model. And we'd want to see in the diploma, we want to see that you've used other reading, that you've actually gone out, read articles, read books, read quite extensively, and incorporated that into your own way of doing this. Because there isn't one way. Every single person does it differently. What we'll be doing is working with your confidence with the tools, because obviously it's new stuff. It may be stuff that you've used before, but now using it in a different context. How you bring your authority and presence to the team coaching space. And obviously your resilience as you go through the ups and downs of trying things out and experimenting without knowing where it's going to go. And it's working with teams at all levels. Major part of it is actually getting a better understanding of yourself. A much deeper understanding of you in that team coaching role and who you have to become and how you use that internal radar and sensing far more than just your headspace. You will be supported by expert faculty. We don't put anyone into faculty unless they're really experienced in this. They're all highly experienced team coaches, trainers, and it will include Peter doing some of the work within it as well. And what you'll develop through this is a network. And someone was mentioning before this space on the site for the alumni. That's your network of people who have been through the diploma, have created their own model, are aware of themselves. You can then rely on to bounce things off and to try different things as you go through. So there's a fair bit involved. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in just one session. This is a 12 to 14 month process. It's not a short journey, but it's a journey that can be life-changing. So ignore the November 2018 on there. We're slightly out of date with the slide, but essentially you've already done the first module. Congratulations, you're already on the journey. We will do an intro session, and just as a starter, same way as we did with the certificate, and help you start thinking about how you're going to identify a client team. We then go through 3 modules, module 2, 3, and 4, which will go into a deep dive on the 5 disciplines. And then there's a period of time where you start to write up your case study and your model of team coaching. What we want is half-finished thinking by the time you come to module 5, where you'll be presenting to the other people on the course and gaining their feedback on where you've got to so far in your progression, both with the team and on your individual model. So module 5 is presentation back to peers and feedback from them before we go into the final piece, which is the written pieces of work. As we're going through that, all the way through that, you will have team coaching work with clients. There will be supervision built in. So you will be in supervision groups as well. So you will be gaining supervision as you go through the process. And you'll be working in peer groups who can support you as you're working on that development, both of yourself and with the team. So the skills and capabilities will be coming through as you both on the modules and, more importantly, between modules. And those practice groups start to form really tight-knit and close groups of support as you go through. The final piece, which isn't on this slide, is the written piece, which is writing up the case study and your reflections on what was going on and what was happening if you were working in a coaching pair, what was happening between the two of you. And then a write-up of your model together with whatever academic reading you've done, so you can reference back to that. And then finally the Viva, which is basically where you'll sit down with a member of faculty and have a chat. It's not an examination, it is a chat to see if you are living what you've written. And what we found with the Vivas is they are also a learning journey as well. The learning that comes out just from that discussion and from reviewing where you've got to so far gives you the steps for your next development stage. So it isn't a pass or fail question and answer session, it's a discussion in terms of how you've embodied what it is you've written and learned from the client team.